This video is brought to you by Brilliant. As we've detailed in previous videos, polling suggests that more and more voters think Brexit was a mistake, and a majority of Brits now want another referendum on the issue. The latest YouGov polling shows a record 56% of Brits, including 22% of Brexiteers, think that Brexit was a mistake, while just 31% think that it was the right decision. However, at this moment in time, no major UK party is advocating rejoining the EU at the next general election. Even Labour, which is supposed to be the more pro-EU of the two main parties, has ruled out rejoining the single market and customs union, and the Liberal Democrats are only advocating rejoining the single market, not the EU itself. Clearly, there's little appetite for rejoining the EU amongst the UK's political class. And in our previous video on the topic, we've stressed that while there might be growing pro-EU sentiment amongst the UK electorate, the chances of the UK actually rejoining anytime soon are pretty slim, both because no mainstream party has it as a policy and because it's an open question as to whether the EU would even agree to it. However, Michel Barnier, the former chief EU negotiator for Brexit, was recently interviewed on ITV's Peston TV show, and he said that, contrary to our apparent doom-mongering, the door is open, and the UK could genuinely apply to rejoin any time. So for this video, we thought we'd take a look at what would happen if the UK did actually take Barnier's advice and apply to rejoin, and whether the EU would ever let the UK back into the bloc. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's get straight into it. Would the EU let the UK back in? Well, from the EU's perspective, there are a couple of arguments for and against the UK rejoining. Let's first take a look at the arguments against. First, the UK rejoining would be an obstacle to further EU political integration. When the UK was a member of the EU, many inside the EU, particularly the French, saw the UK as a hindrance to the idea of political integration. As a member, the UK preferred widening, expansion of the EU to include Eastern Europe, over deepening, just focusing on single currency, Schengen, etc. The UK also loved its opt-outs and never joined the Schengen area or the euro. Some analysts even believe that the coronavirus bailout, where member states agreed to jointly borrow €715 billion to respond to the pandemic, would never have been agreed to if the UK was still a member. Many inside the EU believe it needs to change first before it accepts anyone new. And the UK's size and general wariness of further integration would hinder that project. Second, it could become another unwanted troublemaker. This might sound obvious, but the EU would need to be very convinced that Brexitism has been completely purged from the UK body politic before it would even open talks. For example, they would not welcome a membership application from a potential Starmer government if the Conservative opposition remained opposed to the EU. That's because there would be a danger of Britain joining and leaving every few years. There needs to be a stable, sustained and unambiguous commitment in the UK to membership, as there's no appetite from the EU side to reintroduce a troublesome member state. Now, let's take a look at the major reasons why the EU would allow the UK back in. Let's assume the UK is fully committed to the EU cause. What have they got to gain? Well, several things. First, and most obviously, the UK would be one of the largest economies in the EU, a net contributor to the EU budget, and great news for the single market. Second, the UK has one of the largest militaries in Europe, and its presence could go some way to help the EU develop a feasible defence policy. Third, if the UK were to rejoin, it would be possibly the best advert there is for EU membership, and would help prevent further anti-EU sentiment inside the EU. A country that democratically decides to leave, but then changes its mind and democratically decides to rejoin, would demonstrate to the rest of the EU members, if it hasn't done so already, that going alone is very difficult in today's globalised and interconnected world. So, assuming that both sides were keen, what would the UK actually have to do to rejoin? First, the conditions. Assuming the UK didn't get any special treatment, it would need to prove that it can meet what's called the Copenhagen criteria, which consists of the following. Political, so EU values, sound institutions and robust checks and balances. Economic, so a functioning and resilient market economy. Administrative and institutional, so that's the capacity to implement and absorb the full sum of EU law. Given it used to be a member, the UK would almost definitely satisfy these criteria, but it runs into more trouble with the Euro and the Schengen area, which are both requirements for new member states. Even if they didn't ask for all the previous opt-outs, it's hard to imagine the UK giving up any border controls for Schengen or the pound for the euro. And any UK government that applied to rejoin would almost definitely try to carve out exemptions here, which could scupper their application. Now, technically, there's no specific time limit for these measures, and they can be phased in later, if at all, once the UK becomes a member. For example, Cyprus, Romania and Bulgaria have yet to join the Schengen area, but technically are legally obligated to, and 7 countries, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Denmark, Hungary, Poland, Romania and Sweden, are EU members but do not use the euro. However, the EU would probably want guarantees that the UK wasn't going to do this, not least because it would make further EU integration significantly more difficult. Whatever compromises the two sides end up agreeing to, it's hard to see it getting unanimous support from the EU, as would be required. It's hard, for example, to imagine Macron agreeing to anything apart from full-fledged membership for the UK, given his aspirations for deeper political integration within the EU. So that's what it would actually require for the UK to join the EU. While it's technically and legally possible, the political barriers here mean it's unlikely to happen anytime soon, as generous as Barnier's offer might have been. Having just watched an 8-minute video explaining the UK rejoining the EU, it's fair to say that you have a desire to learn and better your knowledge of EU politics. Well, we've got something that you might enjoy and will continue your online educational journey. Brilliant. Brilliant is an online STEM learning platform where you can learn everything from quantum computing or algebra to logical decision making. And if you don't want to learn more about the world from simply just watching YouTube videos, then you're in luck, because Brilliant actually teaches you by doing, using active learning techniques to teach you the principles behind otherwise complex subjects, and ensuring you actually understand what's going on. And rather like a good TLDR news video, Brilliant breaks topics down into accessible chunks, which you can work through whenever you have time. There's no homework, there's no deadlines, and there's no core classes. You can spend anything from a few minutes to a few hours a day accumulating new knowledge in an actually fun way. So whether you want to brush up on your basic maths skills, improve your employment prospects by learning about future technologies, or just have fun with coding, you can check out everything Brilliant has to offer free for a full 30 days. Click on the link in the description. Plus, the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Thanks for your support.